Yeah, sure thing. Hi, everybody. It's good to be with you here. Welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. I don't think we have anyone necessarily good evening yet, but let's jump right into it for fingerprint device intelligence for fintech. Um, there we go. Just a couple pieces of introduction here. First, James Tomlinson. I'm an account executive here at Fingerprint. I've been here about 3 years, and I'm coming to you from the beautiful Las Vegas, Nevada, which is quite beautiful this time of year. I think we're at 61 degrees and sunny. So ask me again in August and I'll have a different answer. But things are nice now. And I'll kick over to John.
Everyone, John George. I lead the solutions engineering team here at Fingerprint. Been with Fingerprint for a little more than 2 years, and I based out of Dallas, Texas. You have my email address there. So if any questions regarding the solution itself or from an architecture perspective, feel free to email me and I should get back to you. Glad to meet you all.
Yeah, and Courtney mentioned at the top of the call here, there is a chat function, so feel free to put in questions as they come up. We'll try to respond in real time if it makes sense. But getting right into the agenda here, we have about 20 minutes of content and 10 minutes towards the end for Q&A, but we can keep this conversational if there's a question that's quite relevant to what we're discussing. So with that, what we're going to spend that 20 minutes doing is talking about prevalent fraud and how the balance of strong security and user friction plays into the roles that we're discussing here around anti-fraud. Device identification is really challenging and it's becoming more and more challenging. So we're going to get into some of those reasons and how Fingerprint is positioned to really help teams relieve that burden of device identification, which goes into what it is that we actually do. And then John is going to finish things out with a product demo before we get into some Q&A. So with that, let's talk about what's really at stake here when it comes to the real cost of fraud. In terms of average fraud loss for a fintech company per year, it's around $51 million. And that's really just looking at the real cost of fraud. That's not coming from it in the lens of what are the negative impacts of customer satisfaction or reputation hits and PR, negative PR that comes with it. I think if you have fraudulent activity or some kind of event, there's probably dozens of journalists ready to write an article about that, right? So we're talking about the real cost, and there are certainly more or less quantifiable costs of fraud. And so about 80% of those companies say that bad customer experience, negatively impacts the performance that they're aiming for, namely, something like deposits, right? And then a quarter of those are trying to also invest in what they're calling instant capabilities. And you can think of that as easier forms of login, of checkout, things of that nature, right? So what exists really is this conflict, or it's a balance. Sometimes it's a conflict between improving security on one end while also not introducing maybe too strict or unnecessary friction for good users. And that balance can be really tricky to nail down. So we all know fraud is prevalent in the cat and mouse game of fraud and anti-fraud. As soon as one team gets an advantage or an edge, the other side responds in kind. And so that battle doesn't seem to be ending anytime soon. And the current ecosystem that we're living in is making it more and more challenging for us as people on the side of preventing fraud. And there are tools that fraudsters have access to that didn't necessarily before. And some of the same tools that we like as users, right, around privacy, so incognito browsing or the prevalence of VPNs. I think most of us know how to delete cookies, right, and improve our privacy online. Those same tools are leveraged by fraudsters. So it makes it much more challenging for us to differentiate between what is a good user, what is a bad actor, because of the tools available, in this current climate here. They're also, fraudsters relying on the ever-changing landscape from what browsers and operating systems are implementing. So we all know third-party cookies are pretty much going away if they haven't already gone away. And so some of the signals that you already had access to and some of those methods for user identification are becoming increasingly unreliable. So we're needing new and creative and innovative tools to be able to make that differentiation more compelling and more instant. And then lastly, the regulatory environment is not getting any easier. If you're in Europe, you're looking at GDPR. Here in the US, we have CCPA and among a number of other factors here, 3DS and FIDO certainly. So compliance teams are feeling that pressure, and being able to respond and stay ahead of the curve with new tools in the environment that users and fraudsters have access to, the changing nature of operating systems and browsers, as well as regulatory pressure, obviously makes this a really difficult problem to solve. So with that, I'll turn things over to John, and he can introduce Fingerprint.
Awesome. From a technical architecture perspective, how does Fingerprint perform? Give you that visitor ID or the device identification that we were talking about. How is it able to give you a very highly accurate and stable identifier for that specific browser or that device? The way it works is by using a JavaScript agent on web applications and SDKs on mobile applications. And this agent basically collects a bunch of signals. On web apps, we are talking about close to 100 different signals from the browser side, from the device side, from the network side. And there's some proprietary signals that we collect. And then once it's collected, it's sent to our backend servers where it's crunched. There is fuzzy matching happening in the backend to re-identify a returning browser or device. There are ML models that are applied to it, so that some of those signals can change, whereas there are some stable signals that don't change. So even if an end user upgrades their browser or changes their operating system version, we are still able to give that same identifier back. So all of that happens on our backend. A response comes back to either client side, and you can opt it to come back to server side with that visitor ID. That visitor ID is that 99.5% accurate identifier that we are talking about. So as long as John is using the same Chrome browser on his MacBook Air, that visitor ID won't change. So when we talk about accuracy 99.5%, which means that 99.5% of the times, we will generate that same identifier for that same browser and same endpoint device. So that's how the system works in a nutshell. There are other signals that we return. I'll get to that in the next slides. James, you want to move forward? Yep. So I talked about the other signals. So along with that visitor ID, that unique identifier, we return some more extra information just to give you some signals that you can use as part of your decision engines. Now, these are signals related to user behavior. For example, is the user using a privacy-focused browser? Are they running this application in an incognito environment? Do they have root access to their Android devices? Are they trying to tamper some of the signals on the browser side to pretend to be someone else or pretend to be a completely new user? Along with that, we also send you some device data signals. So like I said, we capture about 100 odd signals. We will return about 35 signals back to you. So if your decision engines are already using some of these signals, you can continue to build on top of them. We also return some network signals. We give you an IP-based geolocation of where that end user could be based out of. VPN detection is another strong signal that we return. So you can, if you have region-specific products or pricing, you can enforce that with Fingerprint. IP blocklist matching. Does this IP does it belong to a block list of IP addresses? We'll be able to give you that information. So as you can see, along with the visitor ID or that device identifier, when you club some of these smart signals along with it, you're able to make much more informed decision about that specific end user, their intent and also their platform. Bot detection is another strong signal that we respond with. So we'll tell you if this is a real user versus a bot. So if you're going through a login flow, there's no need for a bot to be on that screen. So you can change the experience or maybe block that action depending on the response there. Then on the mobile device side, similar experience, we will tell you if the platform is trustworthy. We'll tell you if the Android device is rooted. We'll tell you if the iOS devices is jailbroken. When was the last time it was factory reset? So from a multi-accounting perspective, if you want to prevent users from creating multiple accounts by factory resetting their device, we'll be able to tell you when this device was last factory reset. We can tell you if the requests are coming from a cloned app, right? So multiple versions of the same app installed on the same device, just to pretend to be two different users. We will be able to give you that information. So those are the smart signals that we return today. This list keeps growing. Just recently, we released another one called an high activity device. So we will tell you if we are seeing unusually high traffic coming from this specific device. It could be part of a fraud ring. So we will be able to respond back with that information also. So the visitor ID, the device ID gives you that strong and stable signal from an identification perspective. And then when you add on the smart signals, you get to know about the intent and the platform from which these requests are coming from. So that's the platform experience that we are providing today.
Yeah, and just to add some color here, how customers are typically looking at this is they're creating their own tolerance levels. And what I mean by that is, I think every other YouTube video I see or podcast is advertising a VPN. So me being on a VPN is not necessarily showing my intent, but it's when coupling together, I'm on VPN, I'm using incognito, looks like I've tampered with my browser in some way, that's completely anomalous behavior from what you would see, from a good user. And so what we're doing is working with those teams to understand what that threshold looks like, and work with them to optimize those decision engines.
Awesome. And so we briefly touched on the platform piece, right? So in this, so it's a slide showing you everything that is involved in that setup. So you have your web applications, you have your mobile applications, you have your integrations. All of that feeds into our platform. So you have the big identification piece, which is basically that visitor ID or the device ID that we return. And then along with that, you have the smart signals piece. And then from a consumption perspective, you can opt to get all these responses back to client side, or you can use webhooks so that it goes directly into your data storage. So your decision engines and your fraud engines are ready to consume it as soon as the request comes from the front end. So that's the platform in a nutshell. Happy to dive into it in later conversations if there are any specific things that you wanted to add. But yeah, that's everything in a nutshell.
Yeah, and so just to wrap a few things up here before we get into the demo, outlining how our customers mainly benefit from the device identification piece and smart signals. One, obviously preventing fraud, account takeover, chargebacks, payment fraud, account creation are pretty much the heavy hitters there, right? So if you're able to get that reliable and accurate visitor ID and match it to the credentials and account information you have on file, anytime that changes or anytime there's a difference there, that's an indication to look into it further, step up authentication, that type of thing, right? And then obviously if someone's using a bunch of seemingly nefarious tools to conceal their identity, then you have the intelligence to make better decisions around that. Improving the UX. So all of that should not be at the expense of a good user, right? And adding unnecessary or really strict or over-tuned models to mistake a good user for a bad actor is just a really bad customer experience. So this gives you the intelligence to not only identify when a user is suspicious, but also confidently authenticate your good users and give them a better experience, right? And then lastly, accurate measurement of the traffic coming into a site or a platform. Because those traditional tools and methods are becoming more and more unreliable, those measurement platforms, right, accurately adding information to your CDP or just knowing what is the true, user count or, amount of traffic coming into my website at a given time. Those are really hard problems to solve more and more these days. So having a accurate identifier to glean insights there is going to be really compelling. I'm not going to spend too much time on this side, just a kind of a logo soup of the different problems that we solve here with fingerprint device identification, and then wanted to get into a couple customer stories here, namely from checkout, Simple, and Zip. All experiencing more or less the same problem, which was chargebacks and that costing and affecting their bottom line. The way they responded to that, I alluded to it, right? It's perhaps adding unnecessary friction for the customer experience, which has a negative impact on good customers, and then over tuning those models where you're actually being overly sensitive to try to catch fraudulent actors at the expense of mistakenly assuming a good user is actually has nefarious intent. So with Fingerprint, they're able to put a stop to a lot of that by recognizing that anonymous traffic, which is really at the core of what we're trying to help you do here. Is there's traffic coming in, and a lot of it is anonymous to you, whether they're repeat users, new users, or nefarious bad actors. We want to give you the tools to be able to identify them. And so with that, I think we're going to, and just lastly on new account fraud, something that we're seeing more and more is promo abuse or new user promotional abuse. I think you can pretty much go online and search for creative ways to circumvent systems that are in place or take advantage of different promotions that exist for new users only. And it's really easy these days to manipulate your system, clear some cookies, use a different incognito browsing or VPN in order to take advantage of that, where our identifier remains consistent in all of those types of applications. So you'll be able to see when someone is trying to create multiple accounts, pretend to be a new user. And I think that gives us just enough time, John, to get into the demo and have some Q&A after.
Sure, yeah. Before we get into the demo, there were two questions, if I can answer those. So the first question was, is it possible to detect if the user is using virtual camera instead of physical camera? The way the agent works, we try to minimize or make sure that there are no permissions required for our JavaScript agent or the SDKs to work, right? So that that kind of a setup ensures that there is less friction and the end user is not really aware that that their device identification is happening in the backend. That being said, that blocks us from getting access to certain low-level signals like the physical camera, right? So we don't do that today. We are not unable to get to that level without asking for more permissions, and that's the reason we are unable to tell you if there's a virtual camera being used or a physical camera. So that's the reason we don't do that today. The second question was, if the Fingerprint platform is storing users' data to generate the visitor ID, what measures are you using to protect this data? Will you honor request to delete the data? So just to clarify one thing, we don't collect user data, right? So all the 100 or so odd signals that I spoke about, those are very benign signals, right? Those are your canvas settings, your display settings, your audio settings, your fonts, things like that, which are very benign and not PII information. The only information that we collect or signal that we collect that can be categorized as PII is IP address. None of the other signals can be categorized as PII. We are GDPR compliant, so we have a data center in the EU region for all our data storage and services to function within that region. So from that perspective, we are GDPR and CCPA compliant. Yeah, then from a deletion perspective, the data, the snapshot that we collect for every event, that gets deleted by default in 90 days. But as part of our contractual negotiations, that time frame is up for negotiation. Awesome. And there was another question that came in: can I host the Fingerprint JavaScript on my side instead of serving it from your servers? Yeah, you can do that. We have a static version of the JavaScript that you can make, put it as part of your DevOps flow, so it gets served from your system. The only downside of doing something like that is that you have to keep it up to date with our version releases. So we release a new minor version every 2 or 3 months. So there needs to be a process to download that and then run your static analysis and things like that on it. So yeah, as long as you're doing that, that static agent is definitely something that we support. Let me
So
quickly
John,
go
we
to the
see some,
demo.
as I was going to say, we see a lot of questions coming in. Maybe let's get into the demo, and some of these
Yep,
will actually be well relevant for what you're talking about.
absolutely. Yeah, let's do that. And then I can come back to these questions once we have more time. Awesome. Let me quickly share my screen here. Okay, so this is the device identifier that I was talking about, the visitor ID. And so you can go to fingerprint.com/demo today and look at that visitor ID for yourself. And you can play around with it, go switch on your VPN, see if the visitor ID remains the same, switch on incognito and see if it remains same. So you can see how that ID is very sticky. From a response perspective, right? What kind of data will come back to you once that API is invoked? You can go to fingerprinthub.com/playground, and that should give you a look into the response itself. So on the client side, it's usually limited to this response. So you get the visitor ID, along with that, you get some signals. But the smart signals response comes on server side. So you don't want to tell a bot that we detected it to be a bot. So that response comes directly back to your servers, into your data stores for further analysis. Now let me quickly jump into the demo itself. A very simple demo. What I'm trying to show here is that how you can use that very sticky and accurate device identifier to make sure if there is a chargeback coming in, that you can flag that visitor ID. And so when they come back, even if they come back as a completely different user, as long as that visitor ID remains the same, you can take action on that specific transaction. So chargeback prevention is the use case here. So let me quickly create an account and go into this e-learning website and try and sign up for a service using a stolen credit card, let's say. So this is a stolen credit card. I'm putting in, someone else's details. So I put in the details of that stolen credit card. I clicked on submit. Now, there is a different system, probably a system that you already use, marked this transaction as coming from a stolen credit card. So you can see something popped up here. Now, what that tells me is that this account or this device is not trustworthy anymore. So I put them into a different bucket, maybe a pool of flagged devices. So let's see what happens when this user comes back, right? So this user is logging in again. And since that visitor ID remains the same, irrespective of when they log in, since that login is now coming from a flagged device, you will suspend that account. Now let's see what happens if this user tries to come back on an incognito window. What he's trying to do now is to see if this action or this identification persists across into an incognito session. So he will get the same experience, right? Because the visitor ID is now sticky, we've detected it to be the same visitor ID on the normal session. We have detected it to be the same visitor ID on the incognito session. So now that device is flagged, no more transactions will be approved or facilitated from that specific device. Now you can use that for a whole lot of different purposes. You can use it to use that identifier to make sure there are no more than one or two accounts are created from a specific device. So if it's a trial abuse or a promo abuse kind of a situation, you can do that. On the flip side, you can use that visitor ID to ensure that a good user does not see an OTP screen over and over again, right? So as part of your login flow, since that identifier is sticky and it's about 99.5% accurate, once you clear a user, as long as he's coming from the same browser and same device, he won't be shown that OTP screen again. So reducing friction while in the backend you're doing that MFA using that device intelligence layer. So that's the demo in a nutshell here. And so we can, we have about
Yeah, a couple
4.
of questions. Yeah, I've been kind of monitoring here, John.
Okay.
Going right from the top. So how strong is the visitor ID, and is it resistant to things like device factory reset, virtualization, so parallel spaces, app cloners, virtual machines, things of that nature?
Yeah. So the visitor ID, like I said, the visitor ID itself is very sticky and very stable. But when you combine it with smart signals, that's where a lot of value also comes in, right? So, for example, in the question talked about device factory reset. So we do have a smart signal that will tell you when the device was last factory reset. Virtualization, there is a smart signal that will detect if this application is running within an emulator or emulated or a virtual machine kind of an environment. So those smart signals, when you club with the visitor ID, you can detect these specific scenarios.
We have a question from Tony. How do webhooks increase accuracy?
So webhooks don't necessarily increase accuracy. What it does is it reduces you to build a pipe from your front end to your back end, right? So you can have all this response come to your front end system and then build it, push it back into your backend for authentication, right? What webhooks will do is it will directly push it to your data store. So when the request from the client side comes to your backend systems, you already have the device intelligence information, so you don't have to build that pipe. That's the only reason why you would set up a webhook. Accuracy would remain the same in both cases.
And then maybe I can add some answer to this one from Thomas. Does Fingerprint meet requirements for privacy in Brazil? Thomas, I believe you're talking about the LGPD, which itself was built really with the foundation of GDPR. So while we're GDPR compliant, we don't have that same certification, if you will, for Brazil, but we do have Brazilian fintech and banking institution customers. So we've gone through that process with them and have come. At least their legal teams have felt it appropriate and meets those standards. So I'm not a lawyer, right, Thomas? I encourage you to look into it yourself. But we have not had any issues in the past for that. John, if I change the browser, would it still work? So if I'm on Chrome and then I switch to Safari.
So Fingerprint for web applications, it's a browser identifier. So you have one identifier for your Chrome browser and a different identifier for Safari. What our customers generally do is that they would build a profile for that user. So as part of the user profile, they'll also have a map of trusted devices for that user. So as long as they are coming in from that device, they take them through that happy path. But if something changes, if John's username password matches, but his device ID does not match with the map of devices that they have for John, that's when they will pull up the authentication flow and maybe take them through an MFA process, right? So generally what our customers do is they'll have a process to validate that this is the right device for this user. And then once validated, then they take them through that happy flow over and over.
And then maybe we have time for one more question here. I'll go down to the one here at the bottom because I like it. What other use cases come to us for security detections? For example, like the prevention use case and not having to issue OTP over and over again. I can think of like SMS in the same vein, right? Maybe just sharing my thoughts. It's really giving you the tools to make more accurate detections around your good users versus someone who is a known fraudster or has some suspicious activity, right? It's kind of those three buckets there. And because we offer the smart signals around device characteristics, as well as that accurate detection, you can better place users into one of those three buckets and act accordingly. John, does anything else come to mind there?
I think you touched on it. Then just bad devices in general, like identifying and flagging bad devices, and this could be tamper detection or bot detection. So those are some of the added signals that can help you. Even first-time visitors, some of those signals will tell you if the intention is right or wrong. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. I think we're just 1 minute over. I really appreciate everyone's attention and questions here. We put our emails there at the front. Of course, reach out to us if you have more questions. If you'd like to do something more personalized, demo-wise, always happy to set that up. So thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye, everyone.